What's good, YouTube? Sensational Sincere's here, and I'm back with another Tom Clancy's The Division Vendor Reset video. We're here for May 8th, 2020's Vendor Reset. So let's get right into this to see what we got good for this week. Okay, so for our first gear items, we're going to head over to Camp Hudson. Here, the weapons vendor has an extended magazine with 109.50% magazine size, 3% crit hit chance, and 4% crit hit damage. For our next gear items, you want to head over to the meat locker. Here, the weapons vendor has a double barrel shotgun with a gear score of 278. It has 324.50% stagger, and the talents it has is vicious, deadly, and trained. For our next gear items, you want to head over to the cavern. Here, the gear vendor has a Spec Ops mask with the talent refreshed on there. It has a gear score of 281. The armor is 959. Its roll for stamina 1,244. And the attributes this has is health on kill and increased kill XP. For our next gear items, you want to head over to the base operations. Here, the Dark Zone gear vendor has a loud vent break with 18% crit hit damage, 2.50% crit hit chance, and 5% optimal range. For our next gear items, we're still at the base operations. Head over to the weapons vendor, and here we got an infantry MG5 with a gear score of 279. It has 22% damage to targets out of cover, and the talents this has is sustained, adept, and unforgiven. For our next gear items, we're still at the base operations. Head over to the gear vendor, and here we got a tactical vest with the talent reckless on there. It has a gear score of 275. The armor is 1,992. Its roll for electronics 1,131. And the attributes this has is skill haste, all resistance, and increased kill XP. Also here we got a prototype electronics mod with 253 electronics and 2.50% exotic damage resilience. For our next gear items, we're still at the base operations. Head over to the advanced weaponry vendor, and here we got a converted USC if you're a fan of this weapon. This has a gear score of 262. It has 19.50% crit hit chance, and the talents this has is fierce, predatory, and ambusher. For our next gear items, we're still at the base operations. Head over to the special equipment vendor, and here we got a historian with a gear score of 264. It has 150% headshot damage, and the talents this has is ferocious, competent, and historian repeats. Also here we got a first wave Vector 45 ACP with a gear score of 266. It has 22% crit hit chance, and the talents this has is brutal, accurate, and fierce. Also here we got a converted SRS with a gear score of 264. It has 168% headshot damage, and the talents this has is deadly, intense, and fierce. Also here we got a custom L86A2 with a gear score of 280. It has 21% damage to targets out of cover, and the talents this has is self-preserved, ferocious, and brutal. Also here we got a tactical mask with the talent enduring on there. It has a gear score of 261. The armor is 855. Its roll for stamina 1,158. And the attributes this has is skill power and blind death resistance. Also here we got a Spec Ops armor with the talent vigorous on there. It has a gear score of 265. The armor is 1,764. Its roll for electronics 1,148. And the attributes this has is exotic damage resilience, enemy armor damage, and ammo capacity. Also here we got a prototype performance mod with 7% ballistic shield health. Also here we got a rugged mini reflex sight with 7.50% crit hit chance, 6% headshot damage, and 4% crit hit damage. For our next gear items, we're still at the base operations. Head over to the special blueprints vendor, and here we got a classic M44 carbine blueprint with a gear score of 256. Also here we got a military M9 blueprint with a gear score of 256. Also here we got a stamina mask blueprint with a gear score of 256. Also here we got a compensator blueprint with a power level 34. For our next gear items, you want to head over to Kermit Station. Here the weapons vendor has a heavy magazine spring with 4% crit hit damage, 5% reload speed, and 10.70% rate of fire. For our next gear items, you want to head over to Camp Clinton. Here the special equipment vendor has a pecan if you're a fan of this weapon. It has a gear score of 282. It has 21% damage to targets out of cover, and the talents this has is competent, predatory, and pecan. Also here we got Liberator if you're a fan of this weapon. It has a gear score of 264. It has 22% enemy armor damage. The talents this has is focused, accurate, and ferocious. Also here we got a historian with a gear score of 259. It has 150% headshot damage. The talents this has is sustained, unforgiven, and historian repeats. Also here we got a Cassidy with a gear score of 279. It has 341% stagger. And the talents this has is fierce, swift, and boomstick. Also here we got a police MK17 with a gear score of 275. It has 145% headshot damage. And the talents this has is swift, vicious, and competent. Also here we got a tactical mask with the talent tenacious on there. It has a gear score of 272. The armor is 934. Its roll for firearms 1,177. And the attributes this has is enemy armor damage and burn resistance. Also here we got a tactical pack with the talent specialized on there. It has a gear score of 264. The armor is 1,218. Its roll for stamina 1,116. And the attributes this has is crit damage and burn resistance. Also here we got a prototype performance mod with 5.50% first aid self-heal. Also here we got a small grip with 18% crit hit damage, 2% accuracy, and 2.50% stability. And also here we got a 5.52 hollow sight with 7.50% crit hit chance, 4% crit hit damage, and 4.50% optimal range. For our next gear items, we're still at Camp Clinton. Head over to the special blueprints vendor, and here we got an ACR blueprint with a gear score of 256. We got a classic M60 blueprint with a gear score of 256. We got a holster blueprint here with a gear score of 256. And also here we got some electronic knee pads blueprint with a gear score of 256. Also here we got a flash hider blueprint with a power level 34. For our next gear items, you want to head over to Autumn's Hope. Here the gear vendor has a prototype performance mod with 2% pulse crit hit damage. For our next gear items, you want to head over to Madison's Stand. Here the gear vendor has a prototype stamina mod with 209 stamina and 3% damage to elites. For our next gear items, you want to head over to The Last Call. Here the weapons vendor has a military M870 with a gear score of 264. It has 301% stagger, and the talents this has is talented, deadly, and competent. For our next gear items, you want to head over to the Ward. Here the gear vendor has a prototype electronics mod with 246 electronics and 3% skill haste. For our next gear items, you want to head over to the Southpaw. Here the gear vendor has a prototype stamina mod with 252 stamina and 1% crit hit chance. For our next gear items, you want to head over to the Firewall. Here the gear vendor has an operator pack with the talent Relentless on there. It has a gear score of 272. The armor is 1,205. Its roll for firearms 1,264. And the attributes this has is crit damage and ammo capacity. For our next gear items, you want to head over to West 31st Street checkpoint. Here the Dark Zone vendor has a Super 90 with a gear score of 264. It has 323.50% stagger. And the talents this has is Meticulous, Unforgiving, and Ferocious. And then also here we got a prototype performance mod with 4.50% support station healing speed. For our next gear items, you want to head over to West 34th Street checkpoint. And then also here we got a loud vent break with 18% crit hit damage, 2.50% stability, and 6% headshot damage. For our next gear items, you want to head over to West 53rd Street checkpoint. Here the Dark Zone vendor has a prototype performance mod with 4% sticky bomb damage. And then also here we got a C79 scope with 17% crit hit damage, 2% accuracy, and 2.50% stability. For our next gear items, you want to head over to East 64th Street checkpoint. Here the Dark Zone gear mod vendor has a prototype firearms mod with 254 firearms and 3,018 skill power. For our next gear items, you want to head over to East 58th Street checkpoint. Here the Dark Zone gear vendor has a tactical mask with the talent Enduring on there. It has a gear score of 273. The armor is 957. Its roll for stamina 1,155. And the attributes this has is all resistance and damage to elites. Also here we got an operator vest with the talent Vigorous on there. It has a gear score of 271. The armor is 1,714. Its roll for electronics 1,221. And the attributes this has is skill haste, all resistance, and increased kill XP. Also here we got an operator pack with the talent Relentless on there. It has a gear score of 263. The armor is 1,153. Its roll for electronics 1,176. And the attributes this has is health and bleed resistance. And then also here we got some Spec Op gloves with the talent Savaged on there. They have a gear score of 266. The armor is 899. Its roll for firearms 1,138. And the attributes this has is assault rifle damage, enemy armor damage, and health on kill. For our next gear items, you want to head over to the Park Ave checkpoint. Here the Dark Zone weapons vendor has a tactical Super 90 SBS with a gear score of 281. It has 348% stagger. And the talents this has is Deadly, Predatory, and Unforgiving. Also here we got a custom M44 with a gear score of 261. It has 156% headshot damage. The talents this has is Destructive, Brutal, and Predatory. And also here we got a classic M60 with a gear score of 274. It has 22% damage to targets out of cover. And the talents this has is Prepared, Competent, and Vicious. For our next gear items, you want to head over to East 53rd Street checkpoint. Here the Dark Zone vendor has a military P416 with a gear score of 264. It has 20% enemy armor damage, and the talents this has is self-preserved, ferocious, and prepared. Also here we got a prototype firearms mod with 265 firearms and 1% crit hit chance. I had to cash out one of these, I need that. For our next gear items, you want to head over to East 46th Street checkpoint. Here the Dark Zone vendor has a reflex sight with 7% crit hit chance, 2.50% stability, and 4% crit hit damage. For our next gear items, you want to head over to East 42nd Street checkpoint. Here the Dark Zone vendor has a prototype performance mod with 6% sticky bomb explosion radius. For our next gear items, you want to head over to East 40th Street checkpoint. Here the Dark Zone vendor has a military M60E4 with a gear score of 276. It has 22% damage to targets out of cover, and the talents this has is sustained, adept, and deadly. Also here we got a rugged mini reflex sight with 7.50% crit hit chance, 2.50% stability, and 6% headshot damage. For our next gear items, you want to head over to East 34th Street checkpoint. Here the Dark Zone vendor has a military SA-58. If you're a fan of this weapon, it has a gear score of 258. It has 18% enemy armor damage, and the talents this has is adept, unforgiving, and commanding. Also here we got a prototype performance mod with 4.50% ballistic shield damage resilience. For our next gear items, you want to head over to East 31st Street checkpoint. Here the Dark Zone vendor has a hunting M44 with a gear score of 265. It has 167% headshot damage, and the talents it has is deadly, adept, and destructive. And also here we got a prototype firearms mod with 244 firearms and 3,237 skill power. For our next gear items, you want to head over to the 5th Ave checkpoint. Here the Dark Zone vendor has an operator vest with the talent Rapid on there. It has a gear score of 271. The armor is 1,997. Its roll for firearms 1,146. And the attributes it has is health, skill haste, and ammo capacity. And also here we got an extended magazine with 114% magazine size, 4% crit hit damage, and 3% crit hit chance. For our next gear items, you want to head over to DZ2 safe room. Here the Dark Zone gear vendor has a tactical pack with the talent Relentless on there. It has a gear score of 279. The armor is 1,329. Its roll for firearms 1,232. And the attributes this has is crit hit damage and burn resistance. And then also here we got some Spec Op gloves with the talent Savaged on there. They have a gear score of 277. The armor is 975. Its roll for stamina 1,203. And the attributes this has is assault rifle damage, pistol damage, and enemy armor damage. For our next gear items, you want to head over to DZ3 safe room. Here the Dark Zone weapons vendor has a converted SMG9. If you're a fan of this weapon, it has a gear score of 263. It has 19% crit hit chance. And the talents this has is predatory, adept, and ferocious. Also here we got a military M870 with a gear score of 267. It has 303% stagger. And the talents this has is unforgiving, swift, and adept. Also here we got an M700 carbine with a gear score of 261. It has 161% headshot damage. And the talents this has is disciplined, unforgiving, and elevated. For our next gear items, you want to head over to DZ4 safe room. Here the Dark Zone gear mod vendor has a prototype electronics mod with 262 electronics and 3,123 health. And also I mention this because I'm here, we got a prototype performance mod with 7% ballistic shield health. For our next gear items, you want to head over to DZ8 safe room. Here the Dark Zone gear vendor has a tactical mask with the talent Enduring on there. It has a gear score of 265. The armor is 874. Its roll for firearms 1,192. And the attributes this has is skill power and blind death resistance. And then also here we got some operator gloves with the talent Savaged on there. They have a gear score of 278. The armor is 1,000. Its roll for firearms 1,153. And the attributes this has is shotgun damage, pistol damage, and enemy armor damage. For our next gear items, you want to head over to DZ9 safe room. Here the Dark Zone weapon mod vendor has a heavy magazine spring with 2.50% crit hit chance, 12% magazine size, and 10.10% rate of fire. Also here we got loud vent brake with 18% crit hit damage, 3% crit hit chance, and 2% accuracy. And then also here we got a reflex sight with 7% crit hit chance, 4.50% optimal range, and 6% headshot damage. Alright everybody, that's it for our Tom Clancy's The Division Vendor Reset video for May 8th, 2020's Vendor Reset. I hope everybody who tuned into it found them something that they needed. Thanks for smashing those like buttons. Thanks for smashing the sub button. I appreciate that support, y'all. And I will see y'all with the next one, everybody. Take care. Peace.